and welcome to another edition of the Week in Review. I'm your host, Ade, and as ever, what we do is we go through 10 or so stories from the week just past, really interesting stuff, and then I have a guest and we analyze them in some detail. And as ever, I always have a special guest, and I always mean it when I say that. And this week is no exception. I have my friend and colleague, Modu Gajaga. Welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure being here.
Thanks, Gajaga. Now, many of you, of course, know Gajaga as our chief sports correspondent, but he's a man with many interests, as I'm sure you're going to find out as we go through the program. Well, let's kick off with our first story. This one, really exciting. It's a pilot project which, if it takes off, will be rolled out across the rest of the country. What am I talking about? I won't spoil it for you. Have a look at this clip.
The project's intervention regions are Greater Banjul area, Lower River region and Upper River region. In these regions, the project will empower vulnerable youth, women and migrant trainees in horticulture, poultry and fish agriculture. Umar Gay, the project's coordinator, explains how the three regions were identified for the 2-year project.
Some mapping was done to look at in terms of poverty levels within the regions, and also in terms of the returnees from the back way, where they're mostly coming from, where they're returning to. So these were some of the parameters that were looked at in identifying the GBA, LR, and URR.
Now, Mr. Gajaga, as we saw there, this is trying to empower youth, women. You talked there about backway. And one of the things I particularly liked about it is, you know, they're trying to encourage people to go into areas that they don't tend to go into, which could be quite lucrative. I mean, they talked about backway, for example. Do you think this is something that could convince people to stay in their own country?
Well, I certainly don't think so. Basically, it might help in mitigating the exodus of people going through the back way, but to definitely be something that is going to kind of putting a barrier to it, or sort of, you know, discouraging people to use the roof. Because it takes us back to sometime last year when almost about 150 or so youth in the Gambia perished across the coast of in Mauritania. So basically that would tell you that some of the survivors were interviewed, and they said, you know, if they have the opportunity, even tomorrow, even the next day, they would go again.
It nearly made me weep.
So basically it's sort of a cliche, or I would say it is something that is in their minds, that, you know what, I think everything is in Europe. When you go there, it's so elusive that there is an illusion that when you go to Europe, everything would be better for you, which is, of course, a false, something that you would think when you go there, you will realize that this is not the case. You will be very much disappointed. So I think this pilot project would help in a way, because the unemployment rate in this country is staggering. It's a very high figure, so it will help people in getting work, especially youth in these regions that they've talked about, the Greater Banjul area, RRR, and also URR as well.
I think part of what they're trying to do with this pilot project, and it's I think you're saying it's going to be difficult because people have become obsessed with wanting to make this journey. But what they've said to people before, and I've heard this and I've even been involved in it to some extent, when you hear the amount that people have paid to make that journey, and you say to them, well, actually, if you'd put that in a business back home, you could make a thriving business. And what they're trying to do with this pilot is not just kind of say, you know, go into this. They're going to give them funds, they're going to give them training, they're going to give them support, and say to them, look, in 3, 4, 5 years' time, you could be a very wealthy person if you you know, operate this particular business. I mean, do you still think that's not going to make people want to stay?
Well, staying is something very tricky here. When you look at the number of youth in this country, those who have it at the back of their mind that there is silver and gold in Europe. Once I am there, I think life is going to be much more better. You may give them the opportunity here to get into petty trading or maybe getting into fishing and all of that. Some of them have left skill jobs like carpentry, welding and all of that.
Motor mechanics,
One day they tried to save as much money as possible, and they said, I'm going to take off, and I'm going to make sure that I realize my dream of getting to Europe. And once they get to Europe, they find it very disappointing that things are not as rosy as they thought they are.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I have to admit, and I've said this before, both on air and in the office, in discussions, is that I've been to many countries in West Africa, at least 10 or so, and in all of these countries, there is that feeling, there is that sense of what you just talked about. But I think Gambia is the only country I've been to where it's an obsession in a way that I find totally scary. Why is that?
Because the facts of the matter is they've seen the brothers and sisters who have traveled in Europe and parts of America, made it. Some of them would call it a fortune, building very good houses in the Gambia, owning luxury cars at some point, and some of them have good businesses as well. So they're so obsessed. They want the same thing. They want to thrive. They think they've lost all hopes in the Gambia, when obviously there are people who are thriving in this country. They have all that it takes. Some are into business, some are into skills, jobs, and all of those things. So it's going to be very difficult to convince them, but I think it's a good start, and with more sensitization, I think it can change the mindset of a lot of people.
I'm glad you said it's a good start, because I think one of the things that, when I was watching this and I was looking at the pilot, the specific areas they've gone into, sort of, poultry, farming and so on, for a lot of young people, they don't find those as particularly glamorous in any circumstance, not just in African countries. Do you think that is a problem, that, perhaps if they'd concentrated on some other sectors, they might have more success?
Well, I can tell you that for most Gambian youth, getting into the formal sector, that is working in an office and all of those things, are more lucrative or tend to be more glamorous for them, rather than getting into petty trading or maybe fishing or poultry farming, as you talked about, than actually getting into those kind of jobs.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that. So for myself, and I'm sure for Mr. Gajaga, we wish the pilot well. But honestly, let's be realistic, they probably have an uphill task. But honestly, we do wish them well. So good luck with that. And now, heading for a landslide in 2021. Who said that? You probably guessed, but I won't spoil it for you. Have a look at this clip.
He appeared confident that the victory for NPP in 2021 is a foregone conclusion, saying, "This is just the tip of the iceberg."
The tip of the iceberg. Mr. Gajaga, you and I have been election watching, not just in our own country here in the Gambia, but also in America. And also we've seen what's happening in Guinea, in Ivory Coast, and in other African countries. Obviously, NPP, the President's Party, elated at getting their first councillor and their first National Assembly member. But really, a small constituency, can you really extrapolate that? Extrapolate and say landslide because they did well in that?
Well, if I am going to say or use this term, counting your chickens before they are hatched, well, I think it's fairly too early to talk about NPP getting a landslide in the 2021 presidential election. I think there is a whole timeline. There is a lot of grassroots work that needs to be done to be able to convince the voters to support the party, of course, which in a small margin they've been able to do in a small constituency that is in Kerjarga and also in Nyamina West. So in that election, yes, they've won, but it's not even a landslide. When you look at the numbers, in a way, it's about 60+% that they've won in that elections.
That's correct.
So if you look at overall in the Gambia, some parties have their strong basis in the combos in the Greater Banjul area, let's say for instance, and also when you look at the West Coast region and all of that. So this is just fairly a small portion of the country that you are talking about. So being too ambitious to say that in 2021 you're going to win a landslide, I think is a bit exaggeration.
But what was also interesting about this particular election is that we saw what were in all but name coalitions. And so all the parties withdrew or supported and just left two parties to fight it out. That's not likely to be the case in a general or a presidential election, is it?
Well, you can never say never in elections and in politics. Everything is open, is on the table. It depends on what happens, and every hour counts, every minute would count, and every second would count from here against 2021, the presidential election. So I think everything is still in the open. You might see a coalition, even with NPP and other parties. You might see a coalition of the other parties who are like the main opposition parties, sort of fighting it out with now the incumbent party, that is NPP.
And of course, here in the Gambia, we're in a very much what might be, I wouldn't say unique, but a rare in that people were able to elect and unseat an incumbent. It's almost unheard of in Africa. And so if we project to 2021, is this thing in Africa about the power of incumbency, is that likely to be a major factor?
Definitely, without a doubt, it's likely to be a major factor. Looking at the circumstances, you can cast your mind back to these National Assembly elections, which is a by-election which was held in Nyamina West and also in Kerjarga. A lot of people, with all the hearsays, but according to some people who were on the ground, these are facts. A massive campaigning, you know, with the accusations or let's say alleged bribery of voters and all of those are things that we will not get into, because they cannot be substantiated.
Even allegations of campaigning door to door after campaigning
should have stopped, basically. So all these are factors. So if there is a rigorous campaign and, you know, let's see what happens. But I think the power of incumbency in Africa still holds.
It still holds. Thanks on that point. I think I have to agree with you on that one. Now, just Sunday was the 8th of November, was Remembrance Sunday. Remembrance Day itself is hard to forget because it's the 11th day of the 11th month, and that came during the week. But in talking about all this remembrance, how much remembering do we do of our heroes? Some of them are not happy. Have a look at this.
This remembrance celebrations is of no use to the veterans' families. It is God who protected my dad from the war, because he could have even lost his life. The example I will give today is that my dad is attending the celebrations but did not even take breakfast. So, this remembrance is deceptive.
This is Ibu Janha, a Second World War veteran who lost his hearing, sustained injury to his stomach and one of his legs. All legacies from the battleground. Mr. Janha continues to operate a workshop to support his family for survival. Tuti is Ibu Janha's daughter, and she explains her father's living condition, also calling for the intervention of the UK government.
I'm 101 years. I won Second World War.
Someone who fought in the Second World War and has clocked over 100 years and is still going to work for a living.
Somebody who fought in the Second World War, 101 years old, and he's still working. You know, when you say people like this, they're responsible for the kind of freedoms that we have. We owe them something. People say, oh, there isn't an endless pot of money. But really, we owe them a huge debt. What's your thought when you see something like that, where somebody who is 101 years old and he's having to work in a workshop to feed his family?
Quite a very sad one, and this is somebody that I virtually see almost once or twice every week, because where I bought a taxi to get to my house, that's where his workshop is.
I wasn't even aware.
Basically, so it gets me a little emotional. And I think these are people who really stood their ground in those days, in the colonial era. Obviously, you would say they were enlisted into the colonial army, but what they called the World War at the time, they said the whole thing is about defending freedom and making sure that people are free and all of that. So I think they should be well respected, well remembered, and when it comes to their livelihoods as well, I think they should be supported. And this could come, well, from the colonial masters, and also it could come from the government, because they're relevant people. They've played a critical role in those days, and surviving it by now, looking at their life post-war, it's really very sad.
Yeah, and the valid point you made there about, you know, they were fighting to preserve freedom and so on. And what's ironic about that is, as you said, they were enlisted. There was a big propaganda in all the colonial, not a single country that was a colony had gained its independence by that time. And yet these people were convinced to go and fight. As you say, they called it a world war, but essentially these were colonial powers fighting each other. And yet we got dragged into it.
And some even called it the European Tribal War.
This is it. And so, as you rightly say, we owe them a lot. We owe them a great deal, and we should do a lot more. And it is disheartening to see that somebody who's 101 years old is still having to go to work every day to make a living. Okay, we say the colonial masters on whose behalf they fought have not done well by them. But do we, that are now independent countries, should we take up that burden and actually make sure that they benefit somehow?
Well, I think that's obvious, because when you look at what they've been through, and every country, your citizens should be your responsibility as a government to change their livelihoods, to make it better for them. I think that's across the board. Being a war veteran or a non-war veteran, I think every government's responsibility should be making the people's life better, and this is one of them, especially if they are finding it really very hard to survive.
Sure. Thanks for that. So food for thought there for governments across the continent and across the world. So, and now we're going to go for a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we have some more stories. Welcome back. You're watching The Week in Review. I'm your host, Aridarami, and I have a very special guest, Mr. Mamadou Gajaga. Gajaga, welcome.
Yeah, fantastic. It's been a pleasure to be on this platform.
Good. And in case you're just joining us, Mr. Gajaga and I have already discussed 3 stories, so you've missed out. But hey, don't go away. We've got 7 more stories coming. Now, this year has been a stranger year than most. And this is a year when nobody will envy the job of being a finance minister, not just of the Gambia, but of any country. Any budget predictions of a year ago have had to be ripped up and thrown out. So this year, the finance minister has gone to the National Assembly, and this is some of what he had to say.
Seeking parliamentary review and approval for a total appropriation exceeding $22.2 billion. The Minister of Finance, Mahmoud Njai, Wednesday tabled before Parliament the 2021 revenue and expenditure estimates expected to exceed $30 billion. He says COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the economy as the country registered a considerable decline in revenue growth and all expenditures significantly.
There you had our colleague Ezra Nyasi there talking, Mr. Gajaga. COVID-19 impact, we've been hearing these words time and time again, and I was saying that, you know, last year's revenue and budget predictions are having to be ripped up. Really, even now, because we're still uncertain as to when this madness called COVID-19 is going to end, surely even the budget predictions that he's putting forward are probably going to be revised in 2, 3 or 4 months' time, surely.
The uncertainty about COVID-19, about when it's ending, when are we going to get a vaccine, and all of those things, I think it still remains, because when you look at the impact that it has caused economically across the globe for every country, especially for Gambia. Yes, we would say people have been using it as an excuse, especially governments, that COVID-19 has really hit them very hard, which is of course is obvious. Yeah. But if you look at the Gambia's budget estimates every year, having a huge budget deficit, and how are you going to fill in that gap to be able to get that deficit to get things running? Things functioning, it's really going to be very difficult. So the 22 billion, and you know, you're talking about a projection of 30 billion in terms of getting everything running again.
That's right.
And the impact of COVID-19, obviously, they've always talked about it. So now this gives you an opportunity to really well spend on how you go about cuts where it is necessary, and you know, spend as wisely as possible in a particular area of interest, which is going to be of public interest. Because if you look at the amount of money that is being spent on government vehicles, the amount of money that is being spent on fuel and all of those procurements, if the health sector, which is very, very important, of course, one of the most important things, invest more into it, invest more in education, and you cut other budget expenditures rather than, you know, living it as it is, and, you know, you spend almost half of your budget or 3/4 of your budget on unnecessary procurements and all of that.
Well, you talk about unnecessary procurement. I think one of the things that has to suffer, whether they like it or not, is the excessive travel.
Yes.
COVID-19 has forced us to reassess, and it's also forced us to have things like Zoom meetings. We're not advertising. Zoom aren't the only one, but they've become the most popular.
Most popular, yeah.
And meetings have gone ahead. Decisions have been taken without people having to leave their own country. You know, you speak to people in any country in the world, as long as they've got a connection. Surely that has to be at least one area where there has to be huge savings.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to the expenditure on travel, you look at how many government officials travel for meetings and attending conferences around the globe that are curtailed during this COVID-19, which is telling you that sometimes it is not necessary with the use of technology. You've mentioned Zoom, which is one of the technologies which was used quite frequently to do meetings, and it has been very, very effective. Some often been criticized because of the technological advancement. Certain countries have more technological infrastructure than others, but still I think it would be able to save a lot of money to be put into other sectors which are of huge benefit to the general population.
I'm glad you said that, because of course when we talk about you know, using Zoom and these sort of virtual meetings, when people had to travel, it wasn't just the airfare. We had the hotel, and of course they would also get their per diem.
Per diems,
so there are at least 3, probably more. There are at least 3 things that we're saving on by not having people, you know, jet all over the world and to have meetings when, you know, they could just click and have those meetings. So you know, let's hope that this is something. And I think looking at what the minister had to say, really for this country, tourism. We're 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, into the tourism season, and barely a tourist has set foot in the country. That has to be something that's going to have a huge impact going forward, surely.
Yes, if you have almost about 20% of your GDP rather coming from tourism, it's a huge blow if tourists aren't coming in. How are you going to cover up for that?
Sure.
When it comes to taxes also, it has a limitation, because otherwise it's going to break the back of the people who are paying tax.
Sure.
If you raise taxes, that is also going to be detrimental to the livelihoods of the people.
Of course.
So I think save as much as possible, look at the priority areas that is going to benefit the general public, rather than putting it into an area where it is not very much quite useful to generally when you look at everybody's livelihood.
Sure. Good for that. And I know people always say to me, oh my gosh, you're always going on about Cape Verde. But sometimes I mention Cape Verde just as a kind of point of comparison. Last year, as in 2019, they had 890,000 visitors. They were hoping for 1 million this year. Because of COVID, going forward for next year, they have estimated they would lose 500,000 visitors. I don't know whether we here in the Gambia have done the sort of statistics or the projections, but I think those are the sorts of things that we have to take on board. But once again, thank you for that, Mr. Gajaka. Now, something again that's very, very close to my heart. If I showed you my arms, they're full of mosquito bites. I hate them. So the next two items actually are to do with control of malaria. Have a look at this first one first.
It's only for outdoor spraying, so that you can kill all the mosquitoes and insects that that fly, especially in the evening. The objective is to get rid of mosquitoes and insects that can bite or that are biting people, so that people will live a very comfortable life and can be able to sit outside and then comfortably, rest and chat outside.
The Minister of Health and Social Welfare, Dr. Ahmadulamin Samata, says eradicating malaria is a collective responsibility and therefore called on Gambians to embrace this activity in their respective communities.
I'm glad the Minister said that it's a collective responsibility. The fogging machine is good, but it's not the only solution. Surely you and I as citizens have quite a huge role to play, don't we?
A huge role, definitely, and it starts with being as clean as possible, as tidy as possible, especially our surroundings, our environment, our homes, in our streets, and also in places where people gather to do events and all of those things. I think when first we try in as much as possible to clean our environment, that's one aspect of it, and we make sure that there are no stagnant waters in certain places where mosquitoes can use as a breeding ground and to bite people and infect them with this deadly disease, malaria. Malaria has been here, since times immemorial, and it has caused the death of so many people around the globe. So I think fighting malaria is very, very interesting and very important for everyone to get involved.
And as you talked about stagnant water, just explain for anyone who might not know, even the name given to it is a bit of a misnomer. The Latin is malaria, bad air, because when Europeans used to come to Africa, they thought there was something in the air that was causing them to get this. So before they discovered that actually it was the mosquito. Anopheles mosquito that actually carried it, they thought it was bad air that made people get malaria, hence the name it has. But you've said something there, because when we were doing that, and people will see what happens in the next clip that we're going to see, when we were doing that story, I had a discussion with a colleague, and the colleague was saying that poverty was more significant than clean surroundings. And we had quite a discussion. I was going to say argument. Actually, it almost got to that. But I think you're right. I mean, it's about us taking responsibility for our surroundings. And I'm not sure poverty has much to do with wanting your surroundings to be clean, making sure that there's not stagnant water somewhere. I remember I complained to a restaurant because there was stagnant water, and they said, oh, they would come and clear it. They didn't, and I actually went on air and named them. I won't name them again. But these are things where people can take responsibility.
Certainly a sense of responsibility from everyone's part. Collectively, if we do it, it's going to benefit us all, rather than some people doing it and you have the rest of the population not really caring. If you look at the littering you know, indiscriminate littering in the Gambia.
Please don't get me started
yes,
on that one.
maybe we can pause that for another day, because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And some of the drainage systems that we have, people go in there and throw in garbage.
Yeah, sure.
And you're causing more harm than good.
Sure, that's a great point. And as Mr. Gaj says there, and as Dr. Amadou Lamin Samata said there, there is a collective responsibility. There's no good he and I cleaning our compounds or keeping it clean, and then our neighbors on both sides are not doing that. So, you know, what's the point? We all have to do it, and we all have to do it together, because the mosquitoes, they're not going to bite my neighbor because my neighbor's dirty and leave me alone. They bite everybody indiscriminate. So please, we all have a duty. Now, as I said, the next story is also linked to this, and this one actually kind of nicely feeds into exactly the discussion that we've just been having. And we have it for a particular reason, because malaria is a serious scourge in Africa. Most of the people who die from malaria die in Africa. Have a look at this one.
Even though the Brikama Health Center is meant to be cleaned regularly, grass has grown within the premises during the rainy season. This has created a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Mutar Sow is the president of the Lawaga Development Association.
We felt that we have a quota as far as we are existing in the country. Not talk less of having an association that is formed and just towards making sure that trying to uplift the life of people, the life of Gambians, especially the Lawaga Association.
Trying to uplift the life of people. Mr. Gaj, of course, you did that story, and that sort of nicely leads on from the discussion we've just been having. They haven't left it to government and say, oh, it's government's duty to come and do this. They've taken matters into their own hands. Now, you did the story, and I just wondered if you could elaborate some more on what they did to actually clean the environment.
Yes, if you go to the Brikama Hospital or the Brikama District Health Center, as many would call it, this is like the main central part in the West Coast region. You have people coming from the Fonyi part, and you also have people coming from the southern part of it, Katong and Gunjur and all of those places. Right. Like Brikama is the main central health facility there, before you are referred to the main referral health center that is in Banjul. So it's quite at a strategic location, and also many people go in there to seek treatment for different ailments. So getting it cleaned is one thing that gets into the head of the Lawaga Association. Right. This is not the first time. They did it last year, so this is like the second year of going in there and cleaning the hospital environment. Grass grows there, of course, in the rainy season, and this is sort of a vegetation all over the place. And this could be the breeding ground for mosquitoes. Of course. And at some point of the hospital also you have some stagnant water. I don't know whether because of the gutters were filled in to a point they are not being cleaned completely, or they're not being drained as well. So that is really a problem. You have patients coming into the hospital, and you also have people who would be coming there to sort of being companions to the people who are, to people who visit the hospital. So mosquito bites, when they bite you, if they are already infected with this disease called malaria, it could infect you too. So going to the hospital and getting infected with malaria when you actually went there for a headache or coughing or diarrhea or a different ailment, it's quite disturbing. So I think getting in there and cleaning the environment was a very good initiative.
I mean, when I saw the story, I liked it, but it also set off a thought in my head. Once they've done this 1 year, why doesn't the hospital deputize somebody or some bodies to make sure that this, even in the rainy season, the vegetation does not grow to the extent that Lawaga have to come and clean it again? I mean, why don't they do that?
Well, actually, I might not know what are some of the hospitals policies, getting the environment. I know they have cleaners, but those cleaners would definitely clean the building, the main hospital building, and also the different wards in the hospital. So the general environment, obviously it should be somebody's responsibility. Is it the municipality? Is it the Brikama Area Council who would pay some people to come and do that? But it should be regularly cleaned. It should not get to a point where it grows some vegetation within the hospital premises.
Good. Well, thanks. So if you're watching hospital authorities, once Lawaga have departed, deputize somebody or some people to make sure that they keep those areas clean and free of vegetation, rain season, dry season, whatever. It's important, as Kajika says, it's not just the patients. Somebody who comes to accompany a patient could end up getting bitten. And how ironic would that be? You come to hospital to get cured and then you get infected. So thanks for that again. On to our next story. Now, because of COVID-19, China has sent lots of medication. They've sent PPEs around the world, but now they're sending personnel to help those countries that might be struggling with the disease to cope, including the Gambia. Have a look at this.
China has in return been extending our helping hands when the Gambia fights its own battle against COVID-19. The Chinese government and the prominent civil organizations have so far provided the Gambia with 9 consignments of critically needed medical equipment and the PPEs.
This is the 36th batch of China's overseas medical experts with the mission of supporting the fight against the pandemic. This footage by China's global TV network was a live broadcast of the departure ceremony for the medical team to the Gambia from Shenyang, capital of China's northeast Liaoning province.
As you saw in that clip there, as they were departing from China to the Gambia, you saw the Gambian flag there. It's actually broadcast live on TV. What are your thoughts on this sort of help that we've been getting from China, not just the Gambia, but actually globally?
Well, I think it has been very effective when you look at it in the general aspect. This coronavirus pandemic actually started in China. So I think when it comes to this study of the disease, knowing how it infects people and its infection rate and all of those things, they must have had the expertise. So now, apart from helping in terms of equipment, that is PPEs and other medical aid, getting the personnel expertise on the ground to help countries sort of like Gambia, who was struggling to deal with the pandemic. Yes, the rate has gone down a little bit, but that notwithstanding, we should not be complacent at all. So I think getting this expertise on the ground, helping our own medical personnel would really boost the fight against COVID-19.
Yeah, I was reading an article, I think it was called The Politics of COVID-19, and they were saying that before COVID-19, China had been getting a lot of criticism from the West about the way their influence was growing in Africa and in third world countries. But since COVID-19, a lot of the Western countries, yes, they've sent equipment, they've sent medicines, some of them have even sent ambulances, but they've not sent personnel. And this is something that China has done and has kind of got ahead of them.
The China influence continues. The influence of China continues in Africa.
Well,
when you look at it, I think China have done a lot. Of course, it comes with criticism, the purpose of doing it and what are they getting in return and all of that. That could be a topic of discussion for another day.
Yeah,
but they are really stamping their authority in Africa in terms of help, in terms of having a lot of influence in the continent, because the Europeans and the Americans seems to sort of relax a little bit, and China has taken over. So I think it will really take time for Europe and America to gain that confidence and that influence that China already had established in the continent.
Sure, and also I think it's safe to say that in some instances, China is doing this because, as far as we're aware, China hasn't had a second wave of the coronavirus, and yet many of the Western countries, and certainly many countries in Europe, are complaining now of a second wave and possibly a third wave. So perhaps that has a huge amount to do with it.
Definitely. When you look at countries like Germany, countries like the United Kingdom, they've really been affected with the second wave. In fact, some of them have gone into lockdown again.
Yeah.
So I think generally when you look at it, China have been able to deal with the disease, even though that's where it originated from before it spread quickly around the world and it becomes a pandemic.
Sure. Okay, so we say thanks to China for the help that you're giving to us. And now it's time to take another quick commercial break. But don't go away. Yes, we've had 7 stories so far, but guess what? 3 really, really good ones coming up. Stay with us. Join us after the break. Welcome back. You're watching The Week in Review. I'm your host, Ade Darami, and my special guest is Mamadou Gajaga. Gaj, I've enjoyed the analysis and discussion so far, so thanks for coming along this week.
It's a pleasure.
And to our viewers, I said that we had some very interesting stories coming up as we were leading into the break, and I really meant it, because this one is one that I particularly liked and was particularly interested in. Have a look at this.
The pontoon or floating bridge was installed by the Gambia Maritime Administration in collaboration with the Gambia Ports Authority. The aim is to provide safety for passengers who would otherwise get wet or have to pay porters to lift them into the boats or to the shore while embarking or disembarking. The maritime officials believe that the availability of the floating bridge will also provide security for passengers and eliminate criminal activities that used to occur. At the launch, the Public Relations Officer of the Gambia Maritime Administration, Ibrahim Abba, attaches great importance to the initiative, indicating that the floating bridge will help in the safe movement of passengers and the facility is here to stay, even if the ferry resumes operation.
You just saw there, they were talking about a pontoon. Now, the reason I particularly liked this story was, Gaj, they spoke to some of the people who, when there wasn't a pontoon, it was their job to actually carry people across, and they were complaining, saying that, you want us to go and rob and steal. This is the only job we have. Is that good enough reason not to have a pontoon?
Well, I think the pontoon is of great benefit to generally when you look at the people who go there. Yes, sometimes they would carry people and they even fell into the water.
Yeah.
I
The
had an
pontoon or
experience
floating bridge?
about it some 3-4 years ago. So sometimes it will take like 2 people getting to carry one person in the water. It looks quite awkward and sometimes it's unsafe, and especially if you have a material that could fall into the water and you could lose it completely. So I think basically the benefit of this pontoon is far outweighing some of their individual benefits. Yes, of course, they kind of way are hit hard, losing their job or their source of livelihood, but maybe they can look for something else.
I think one of the I think they have to look for something else. But one of the things that the authorities said actually was that in addition to people that being unsafe, they said actually that particular method of carrying people actually led to people, stealing and actually, criminal activity taking place. So surely the pontoon has to be welcomed by most, apart from the porters who made a living, carrying people.
Definitely, without a doubt, I think the Pontoon has really, or would really definitely help a lot of people and would even ease the burden. Yes, they would complain because if you lose your job because of a particular reason, but I think the benefits far outweighs the kind of negative activity that it would pose.
Sure, thanks for that. And now on to another story. We have lots and lots of talks about, sexual and gender-based violence, and there are seminars, there are workshops, and all these kind of things. This one is one such, but with a difference. Have a look.
Gender-based violence has various implications, and consequences on a human being, and it also has legal implications on how we address it. But for me, I like to really focus on the impact it has on the cohesion and development of our society. Gender-based violence is inimical to the development of the people. Gender-based violence is anti-religion. It is criticized, discouraged by every religion that I know.
Sexual and gender-based violence there. Almost every week there's something about it. Either there's something on the radio, there's sensitization and so on. Kunle Adeni, we heard speaking there for UNFPA, I think. And what I particularly liked about this one was that it was for religious leaders. And the reason they brought them on, there were imams, there were bishops there were reverends and pastors, was to actually for them to impart it to their flock, for want of a better word. Is that a good thing?
Well, I think it will transcend to the people who actually they influence a lot, who follow them a lot in terms of advice, in terms of religiously, generally. So I think this is a very good initiative. The sensitization wouldn't only stop on the radios, it wouldn't only stop on television. So it will trickle down to generally wherever you go, the imams, the pastors, like you said, and the reverends would talk to their congregations and their different people to be able to get these things into their head, because gender-based violence has been here for ages, and it seems to be something that it has really affected a lot of people, especially they would say it's women often who are very vulnerable.
The majority.
Yeah, the majority. And in that aspect, I think the more sensitization, the more we talk about it, the more we are getting into very close to solving the problem, rather than, ideally just looking at it like that.
I mean, one of the things that I complain about is that there are lots of workshops and lots of seminars and so on. And sometimes I wonder how effective they are. But there's a point you touched on there, which is about the kind of the respect or the amount of authority that these people carry. Because, when people come here from the West, they go to a meeting and people get up and they say prayers in, they say Muslim prayers and then Christian prayers.
Christian prayers.
They think, what the hell's going on? Because they don't do that, anywhere in Europe. It just does not happen, apart from if you meet Africans, of course. Yeah. And so when they come here, they see that. So you mentioned this thing about, the sort of the amount of authority that these people have. And do you think that they do carry that authority enough to actually have an influence to say to somebody, if you're doing this, stop? Do they have that authority? Yeah,
I think they have a lot of influence. They might not directly be able to stop people, especially people who are being so violent, women, or people who are, some people are doing it because maybe perhaps they're insane in a certain way, because they need help, or they're depressed, or also no excuses at all. But when you look at the imam, the pastor, or the reverend, the number of people that gets into their religious services, if they talk to those people, they will be able to influence or convince a lot of them. And if they get to their households, they can talk to people and sensitize them. And I think it would really help in stopping or helping in the fight against gender-based violence.
The reason I was kind of half smiling is that there was a time when you kind of studied comparative religion, and they would tell you that, you know, somebody goes to the mosque on Friday, there's a khutbah, another person goes to church on Sunday, there's a sermon, and they say that while you're listening to the sermon, it really affects you. And when you go outside, you think, oh gosh, you know, what they just told me, I really must change my ways.
Change my ways, yeah.
But then 2 hours later,
you're basically doing the opposite of what is being said.
Do you think that has an element of truth in it?
Well, I would quite agree. About 90%, it does happen a lot. You go and listen to a particular sermon of the imam or a particular preaching of the bishop or the father, and then, you know, the next minute you're into completely something that is completely different from what you've listened to, and you had promised in your mind that I'm going to change for the better. Maybe if this is a way of life that is really negative, and I'm going to live this way, and I will change for the better, and you end up getting yourself into trouble or getting fairly similarly into something really dangerous.
Sure. Thanks for that, Gaj. And as Gajga says there, you know, you hope that people are going to change, and certainly we hope that, and I particularly like this, as I said before I introduced the story, because I think I do believe that actually these people can be quite influential, and that the people who either listen to them give a khutbah or a sermon actually will listen to them. So let's hope that there's more of this and that is cascaded across the whole country. And now on to our final story, and I'm smiling because it's something that's close to both my heart and that of Mr. Gajaga. Football. Have a look at this.
The last 2.5 years we all together built the confidence. I mean, 2.5 years ago it was 5 years that we were waiting for a competitive victory, and we won against Benin, we won in Angola, the first away victory in over 40 years time. We won friendlies against Congo, Morocco, Guinea, we drew twice against Algeria. That's the confidence the players deserve to have. And it doesn't matter which players are available. With different teams, with different group of players, we achieved always good results.
Mr. Gajaga, of course, that came on both Q Sports and on the news, and the coach was that was before the game.
Yes.
Since the game, and looking ahead to the next game, he's singing a different song, isn't he?
Yeah, a different song, and now the song is about. I'm quite disappointed about the performance of my team, especially in respect to the mistakes that they've made against Gabon. Of course, this is a game that the Gambia lost by 2-1. You would have seen in the news and all the reports that we've done about that particular game. It's a Group D fixture in the AFCON qualifier, which returns obviously in midweek, and we're looking forward to the return leg. But now the coach post-match interview talks about completely how weak his team was, especially for the first half. He has a little bit of improvement in the second half, and he was asked this very interesting question. Losing to Gabon away, does it make the home tie difficult for the Gambia? He talks about Aubameyang being very good. He talks about how the quality of a side that Gabon is, they are ranking the 80 plus, and the Gambia 154, 100 and close to something like that. So that comparison, but he said we have to be aggressive in the second leg, in the return leg, and we have to make sure that we win, even at least by 1-0, because 1-0 victory for Gambia, well, if you go on paper, head to head, then Gambia gets better and you know, tops the group if it remains like that, depending on also what happens between Angola and DR Congo, who are also going to play twice, just like the Gambia, and one of those matches is going to be on Saturday. I
mean, I know the coach got a lot of criticism, but when I heard the quote, I thought, well, this is kind of thing that people used to say. I'm not putting Aubameyang in that league, but you know, when Maradona was facing you, or Pele or Cristiano Ronaldo, they said, you know, it almost like we had a goal start because the opposition kind of were looking at them in awe. But I didn't get that sense with the Gambian players. But nonetheless, in the sense, the coach was right. I mean, the first half performance was particularly poor, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely poor. They lost a lot of possession, especially in midfield. They were completely outgunned, and it was a total dominance for Gabon in the first half, because there were acres of spaces in the back line of Gabon, so they had to organize from the goalkeeper to the defense. So Gambian are not putting in a lot of men in attack. So that gives Gabon a leeway to operate in the wings. And the first goal was literally a giveaway, because a defender fails to clear the ball, and then there was a striker and he gets the ball and, you know, just smashes into the net just like that. And the second goal, yes, Aubameyang escaped through the offside trap and beat the defenders, and a close range effort, he taps it into the net. Well, obviously, a deadly striker like Aubameyang, if you give him that space, he would kill you. So that's how it happens. And late in the game, this is like in the 81st minute, with the introduction of Babakar Traore Steve, he dribbled past 2-3 defenders, got into the box, and lay a pass for Babakar Job to reduce the deficit. And I think when they attacked a little bit, and after that goal they were energized, they attacked a little, created chances, and even had a corner, and even had some free kicks as well. So I think the coach did a lot of defending. Yes, you can respect Gabon, they are a better side on paper and even on the pitch. But that doesn't mean that when you are in possession of the ball, you shouldn't attack and create chances for yourself.
And as they always say in football, don't show too much respect. So in 5 seconds, what's your prediction for the return leg here in the Gambia?
Well, I think it's going to be a difficult one, but I hope the Gambia would at least get a point.
There you are. Mr. Gajaga hopes the Gambia at least get a point. I'm not like him. I hope the Gambia at least win and get 3 points. And I think the second half gives me a bit more encouragement. But overall, thanks for coming on the show, Mr. Gajaga. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure being on this platform, and I'm looking forward to subsequent editions as well.
Thank you for that. And as always, I say to our viewers, you could be doing something else, but you're watching this. So thank you for watching, and join us again next week. Until then, goodbye.